happens if you take Becky Sharp, mix her with Scarlett O'Hara, but then make her Jewish and put her in the post-World War II Soviet Union? Well, you get Klotsvog. Klotsvog is a 2009 novel written by Margarita Khemlin, a Russian author, although she was born in the Ukraine, but she was writing in Russian. She also might have been Jewish, but all of this is a political minefield, so I'm going to skip right over all of this and get straight to the book. Klotsvog is the last name of the protagonist, a woman called Maya, and the book is her life story, told as a confession, if you will. Maya is a Jewish woman born 1930 in a small settlement called Estsor, Ukraine, and the book opens with her and her mother being relocated to Kazakhstan during World War II, while the members of the Jewish community who stayed behind, they all get slaughtered. As Maya and her mother return home, and later when Maya studies in Kiev, there is this ever-present potential threat of Stalin's repressions against the surviving members of the Jewish community that thankfully never actually came to full fruition. These events, however, affect Maya quite a bit and the way that she views her Jewish identity, but also in the way that she approaches life and makes her decisions, a rather practical approach, even in areas that don't always lend themselves to such an approach, like the matters of the heart. And yet, Maya is meticulously practical in the way that she selects her husbands or the way that she treats her children, and that has a lasting effect on them. The effect that Maya is not always aware of, or she simply does not care. And so the book tells the story of this woman, her marriages, her children, and the Jewish community in the USSR. I think if we want to talk about the book, the one thing that we really need to talk about is the character of Maya. She is the one telling her own story. We are privy to her deepest, most thoughts, but at the same time, we only get her version of reality, and so it's prudent to keep in mind the concept of unreliable narrator. I've seen an opinion that unreliable narrator implies a certain level of intentionality in his actions, like he purposefully misleads us, and I don't necessarily believe that to be true. It might be the case, as it is with probably the most famous unreliable narrator, Humbert in Lolita. Since the book is his confession as he awaits his murder trial, he is trying to paint himself in a better light, yes. But at the same time, I believe that he's totally oblivious to Lolita's experience with him, reframing their relationship as this grand love affair, but I do not believe that he was consciously doing that. In the same way, Maya is not that objective in her assessment of herself or her actions, but she is also totally oblivious to people around her, their relationships with her, and most importantly, the effect that she has on them. She's this heady mix of self-absorbed and totally not self-aware that makes her into this unreliable narrator that is rather truthful in her feelings, yes, but not her actions or motivations. A simple example is she keeps calling herself a teacher, a pedagogue, even though she's spent all of 2 months working in a school, but she constantly justifies her manipulations as a pedagogical technique. It's actually quite fun to see this through line progress throughout the story, how in the beginning you actually might believe her that she actually is a pedagogue, but as the story goes on and her techniques become less and less pedagogical and much more vicious, you start to see her for who she really is. And she is manipulative, but I do not believe her to be malicious. There is some conversation about her first husband and whether or not what happened to him was her fault. I don't necessarily believe that to be true. And she did end up helping him in the end, even though her motivations were entirely self-serving. That's probably the main thing. She rarely treats people as people. They are a means to an end to her, or on the other end of the spectrum, a hindrance or the obstacle in her way. And that treatment can actually change on the dime, depending on the situation or whether the other person has had enough of her. It often goes cyclical, especially with her children. At first, she loves her daughter to pieces, dresses her up like a little doll, but then, without any prompting or reason, starts treating her as if she's completely alien to her. Same with her son. She first loves him, then sends him away, then clings to him, but then he's a stranger to her. And all of it really is because Maya only cares about herself. In the intro, I compared Maya to Becky Sharp and Scarlett O'Hara. It needs to be said that I actually never finished Vanity Fair when I first attempted it a few years back. I probably need to give it another go. So my assessment of Becky's character is mostly based on the movie adaptation, and that's not enough to properly gauge her and her interactions. But Scarlett I can speak on. If you look at Scarlett and how she approached her relationships and her actions, there is a lot of similarity with Maya, simply the scale is a little bit different. Scarlett really wanted to have a lot of money and run her business. Maya is slightly less ambitious, but the principle is the same. Maya selects her husbands based on attractions sometimes, but also on the apartment square footage. Or just like Scarlett, she gets pregnant to keep her husband happy. She uses the tools in her arsenal, like her beauty and her cunning, to get her own way, and the men are none the wiser until it is too late. But that comparison actually brings up an issue that I have with Maya's character on like a meta level, because I do not know what she wants. Realistically, she as a character doesn't know either. She simply bounces back and forth between love and hate for her children and whoever the current husband is. She wants better things, like a bigger apartment, yes. There's even a through line in there when she finally lands herself, well, not a wealthy husband. Nobody was really wealthy in the USSR, but a well enough to do husband. And so they start buying her nicer things and nicer dresses, and that's juxtaposed with a single nice dress that she had as a child that she never even got to wear because they had to flee from the war. But even that is not fully explored. She's not impoverished like Becky is, nor is she as ambitious as Scarlett, so this wealth motif does not work, especially in the setting of USSR. She's running from something, but she's not particularly going towards anything. And maybe that's the point. And the thing that she's running from is her Jewish identity. There is an interesting tension here. Maya comes from a Jewish community, but since she as a child learned that being Jewish is quite literally dangerous, first the danger comes from the Nazis and then Stalin, and so she treats her Jewish identity as something, well, I don't want to say that she's ashamed of, even though it might be true, but at least it's something that she rejects in herself and tries to eradicate in her children. That is juxtaposed with both generations flanking her. The older generation, represented by her mother, stepfather, or the older generation in general, who are actually quite proud of their heritage. They talk about it, they speak Yiddish, they keep up with what's going on in Israel. Their path is remembrance and preservation. And then there are Maya's children, her older son Misha, for example, who spent a lot of time with his grandparents, so he soaked in that culture. But then he comes home and Maya tries to get rid of it all, reprimands him for speaking Yiddish, and so that created this dissonance in him and only served to alienate him from her. In a vacuum, she had the best intentions, as the threat of repressions was never really off the table. So her actions can be treated as her trying to protect her son. Like, for example, one of her marriages was motivated in grand part for Misha to have a Ukrainian father, so that once he got his passport, the nationality in his passport would say Ukrainian instead of Jewish. Because realistically, having Jewish nationality in your passport did limit your opportunities in USSR. That is true. The problem is, as always, in the execution and the way that she approached it, being quite cruel to her son. She actually made the same mistake with her daughter, and that backfired in a completely different way. So through these characters, Maya, who never speaks of it, her mother and stepfather, and one of her husbands actually, who are quite proud of their origins, or her daughter who gets bullied for her Jewish identity, we see these different facets of a Jewish experience in the USSR. But it goes broader. In the foreword to the English edition of the book, author Laura Wapner, I guess, ponders on this survivor sphere, as she coined it. I'd always thought that my inclination to distance myself from all things Jewish was a cultural one, an aesthetic choice more than anything else. I realize now that it stems from this sticky, shameful survivor sphere, even though I'm a whole generation removed from the Holocaust. She stresses that authors almost never look at this particular angle of dealing with trauma. We talk a lot about survivor's guilt, but this response is not that uncommon either, and if left unchecked, could also lead to drastic measures and dire consequences. Maya's fear led to her treating all of her relationships as transactional. It completely destroyed her relationship with her mother, never allowed for her to have an emotional connection with any of her men, and only served to alienate both of her children. We see the consequences in the end as they are contrasted with Misha. Maya is utterly alone at the end of the book, and it's not a spoiler, not really, while Misha managed to find these connections in his community, realistically in spite of his mother. Unfortunately, because Maya doesn't care about her son all that much, you have to construct his image out of crumbs of information that she gets, often from other people. So I'm not even sure I have a good idea of who he is at the end of the book, but it is what it is. But he's also the best example of consequences that Maya's actions towards him have led to. One critique of the book that I have actually is that I do not care for the ending. It felt very abrupt. There is an event that serves as a thematic conclusion to the narrative arc from meta level, but not necessarily the character level. And then there is a brief epilogue that essentially reads as if the author got tired of writing the story. My feeling is that she didn't take the character far enough in her journey, or at least that there is something missing in the conclusion of that particular story. Maya keeps repeating the phrase, but it's not the point, multiple times throughout the book, but I'm not sure if she ever got what the point actually was. Overall, it's an interesting exploration of this character and of a person's identity as well. I'm not Jewish, nor do I define my identity via religion or nationality, not really. So it obviously didn't affect me that much. Laura, from the forward, admits to bawling at the end of the story. It obviously did not affect me to the same extent. It's not my culture. But at the same time, I would say that the book can work both literally, but also you could potentially extrapolate the crisis that the character goes through onto something else. Jewish people are not the only marginalized community out there, after all. For me personally, it worked as a story of this woman for whom I felt this fond exasperation as she repeated the same mistakes and bad decisions over and over again, but also as the account of the experience of a member of Jewish community set in a very specific historical context. And I do agree with Laura that Margarita Khemlin presents a very different facet of the Jewish experience, not often explored, and so that makes the book worthy of a read.